Hello and welcome to the video. This is a review of a tournament south of Colorado Springs that I attended on June 24th, 2017. And the tournament name was The Chaos Gods Must Be Crazy. It was kind of a low-key local event. And I figured I'd drive down and attend. Now, I tweeted out at the beginning of this month that I was going to paint my Free Guild army, or try to, and that unfortunately just didn't work. Life kind of got a little bit complicated this month, and I guess my motivation for it kind of evaporated fairly quickly. I still was thinking, even a couple weeks out, that I was like, oh, okay, I can still do it. And I just didn't kind of get around to doing it. I still will make a hobby journey video, because I did get some hobbying in June, but just not painting towards that project. So consequently, I had to go with some existing models. The rules of the tournament were such that you don't have to bring painted models, but you do lose a lot of points. I still wanted to bring painted models. I still feel like that's the appropriate thing to do if you have them. And I'm kind of stuck with choices ever since the General's Handbook. Just by point of reference, this would be the first event and first games that I've played with the General's Handbook rules, which is still rather remarkable given that it's about a year out. And I had painted up 3 armies prior to the General's Handbook since the launch of Age of Sigmar. Some Beastmen, some basically Wood Elves for all intents and purposes, and Tomb King army. And but all 3 aren't quite 2,000 points, and not all 3 are really in their current forms completely uncompetitive. Rather surprising for the Tomb Kings, I'm sure. But it just makes it. I like to stick with the coherent themes. I like to stick with coherent paint jobs. So I didn't want to add in Tomb Kings and other vampire counts into an army. And so I wanted to use something that I already used. And just kind of bring that. And I was kind of conscious of the fact that I didn't want to bring a ton of models. My preference would probably be to bring a Death Rattle army or something like that, but that's a ton of models. More appropriate for a casual game than maybe a competitive where you're under the timer. And so I picked something that I thought would be pretty potent, and I like themes. I think in the end I really regret this, though, and I knew this almost beforehand, because I talked it over with Mrs. Hooves, and she was like, well, you're not going to make any friends. And, I think that's pretty much the truth. But I don't, generally, I was actually thinking of making a video about power gaming and why I'm trying not to be a power gamer, and why in general I don't like it. And I think I broke my own rules making this army, because I took 2 Morngul and Heferata as my general, and then 3 units of 10 skeletons as my core. And that's kind of the core theme of the army. Both the Morngul are good in their own way, in terms of their offensive capability and their resilience to taking damage. But they have, as kind of really icing on the cake, as something that's really good in its own way, and if that's the only rule they had, they would still be really good, and that is the -1 to hit. And they have an aura around the model that makes enemies, depending on their bravery, -1 to -2 to hit. So if you have 2 of them, and you have them stacked together, your opponents are at -2, potentially -4. Neferata's command ability is another -1 that projects a larger aura, so you can really overlap all 3 very easily. And I had a few points left over. Now, what you can tweak a little bit in this army is Manfred. I took Manfred as well. My original army didn't have Manfred. It was just a lot more skeletons. I just didn't think that would look that great. And again, I didn't really want to move around the models necessarily for this. And because there's a painting score, my skeletons aren't great as they currently are not particularly great in terms of their painting. So I wanted to pick a model that, is at least half decent. And so I took Manfred. You could twist around. If you really wanted to push this theme even further, you could take a third Morngul. And you'd actually have points left over. So in this case with Manfred, I actually did have a little bit of points left over, and so I took a Wraith. Again, I've never played the General's Handbook, so I was like, okay, let's take a look at these artifacts here. And one of them, the Cursed Book, happens to have a small little aura that does another -1, and so you can, so that's okay. Well, it fits with my strategy. And so I kind of took that. Now, the -1 to hit, it's one of those things, it does say in the errata that you can stack multiple abilities and spells from a different units. There's no problem with that. And you could stack these spells that add the armor save and such too, if it were not for the rule of 1, right? You can't cast duplicate spells, but you can use duplicate abilities, and so people do use that to their advantage when they are adding modifiers to hit or adding attacks, and they don't really have a problem with it there. But I think this is the only army you can really come across where you can get a substantial minus to hit. That can add up. There are a couple other units throughout the alliances that can do a -1, but I think they're just kind of on their own. Death is one of the few armies now that has that capability, and frankly, I don't know if anyone else has even played this before. It certainly seemed to be a bizarre combination that people had maybe thought about but never actually seen on the table. So this was kind of a fun, in that sense, in an experimental sense, probably not so fun for the opponent. Now, of course, there are rules that a roll of 1 will always fail, but there's no rule stating that a roll on the opposite spectrum will always hit. So you can easily get to the point where your opponent cannot hit you in close combat. And I think that is rather annoying for your opponent. In some ways, if you charge in and you're so buffed that you wipe the opponent's unit or just do massive damage, if you're on the other side of that, it sucks. But if you just cannot hurt them, I think that's almost worse, because your models just become absolutely worthless. Now, I think this army has a lot of strength against melee units. However, I don't think it's great at meeting the conditions to win a lot of the scenarios. The characters are fairly fragile, even Manfred, and their armor save and their amount of wounds is not particularly great. And I don't have a lot of models in general, so I kind of knew it would be a challenge to move across the board and potentially capture objectives and such. But I did also know, by virtue of the army, that if I fight a melee army, I was going to have a huge advantage, and they were going to have a hard time if they try to engage me in melee. But likewise, a ranged army would absolutely screw me over. And that's pretty much what happened. Because if you can stay outside of that minus bubble, you're fine. If you don't need to engage the Morngul, you'll be fine. So, it's kind of funny because the people I fought against kind of thought that the death in general were kind of overpowered. it's kind of the type of thing, if they encounter something they can't deal with, the inclination is to kind of say, well, everything is in the army is terrible. Now, I think most people would say death is far from overpowered. In fact, I've I know there's a lot of commentary on YouTube about how it's completely underpowered and it needs some support. But in general, like I said, I'm very conflicted about this army. I like it for its theme. It's not something I would want to play a lot because I think it's a bad spirited army. It rubs people kind of the wrong way. It's kind of an interesting thing that you might see once in a while, but it has, and like I said, it will dominate any close combat army, but it has such an Achilles heel to it, and it's the type of thing that I think more and more ranged armies are becoming some of the top tier armies right now. So you're almost guaranteed to fight that. So if you win like your first couple games, like I did, as you'll see, you'll be up against a ranged army and then you'll lose horribly. So in either case, the event was fun. There were no rules about painting. And the attendance, it was supposed to be, they had a tournament there about a month or so ago, and the tournament was the turnout was about 15 or 16 people. This time, though, only about 8 people showed up, and they still went ahead. No, I wasn't too disappointed. It was only a couple hour drive. It was fine. Kind of a relaxed little group. The tables were really cool. And I also knew that James from the Rolling Bad podcast was going to be coming up, and so that was kind of cool to see him and meet him. I didn't really get a chance to talk with him too much, but it was kind of cool. So on to the first game. So the first game, I was playing against an Iron Jaws player. And we were playing Take and Hold, where you got to move across to the other side of the table and secure the opponent's objective with 5 or more models. It was a melee army, so I thought I had a good chance. But again, I've never actually played Iron Jaws, and I've actually never played with this army specifically. I played with some of the models at Holy Havoc, obviously, last fall. But this is a completely different strategy. I'd never used Heferata as a general in that capacity, and I've never really tried to stack the minuses quite to that effect. I think even at Holy Havoc, I think most of the time, I completely forgot about the minus to hit altogether. So, I guess it wasn't even too much of a factor there. At that tournament, it was mostly just the indestructibility of the Mongol, because I had Nagash on the table, and there was no rule of 1, so each of the Mongols were walking around with a 2+ armor save immune to rend that could be re-rolled. So that was mostly what I was kind of focused on there. But, they're super resilient as they are, and the minus is obviously a huge deal. But I wasn't really sure if I was going to defeat this opponent. Like I said, once you see the army on the other side of the field and you realize, boy, it's so much bigger than mine, right? He has the exact same number of Ardboys as I have skeletons, plus he has a Maw Crusher and 9 Gore Gruntas, and it's just like, those Mongol better do what they need to do. And thankfully they did. So basically, he moved down one flank of the board with his Maw Crusher and 9 Gore Gruntas. Now, I showed him the scroll for the Mongol because he had asked about it, but I don't think he'd played Death, or certainly not this type of army for death before. And, like I said, I don't think anyone, unless you play it and you kind of see how everything can stack that way. It's the type of thing that you read on paper, like, okay, -1 to hit. And then people don't quite realize that they're going to stack to the point where they completely incapacitate their units. And he had the back of his field 3 units of Ardboys at 10, as I said, and a shaman. And he kept them back there for 2 turns. His shaman was actually on a Balewind vortex. And I guess the Ardboys, having units nearby the shaman kind of boost the shaman power. And so he was using the Foot of Gork spell, I guess, which does a bunch of mortal wounds, and because it's on the Balewind vortex, the range is good and such. And so he smashed Manfred for like 8 mortal wounds with that spell. And I was actually thinking, this is not gonna be good. And once you get like Manfred or one of those types of models down, I mean, his movement went to like 3 or 4. And so, I was thinking, well, he's gonna die, but I'll just move him up and then I'll get engaged, and if he dies, fine, but I'll at least have done something with him. And, if they don't kill him, he'll have at least an opportunity to heal a couple wounds or whatnot. But once you're down to like movement 3 on Manfred, it was just like, oh, this is pointless. I can't even like move behind a piece of terrain to get away from that spell. But I think he kind of realized, because that same turn he moved around with the Maw Crusher and Gore-Gruntas and charged in. And he did get a couple Gore-Grunters on some skeletons, but the brunt of them went on the Morghuls and the Maw Crusher. And I think he was hoping just to smash through there. And that didn't happen. Like I said, most of them were at -3 to hit. I think the Orc Boys, or whatever they have on the Gore-Gruntas, I think they could hit on 6s, but the Boars couldn't hit at all. And the Maw Crusher itself couldn't hit. And the War Boss could get a couple attacks off at 6s. So basically, and frankly, I mean, even if you didn't have the minuses to hit, Morgul would still be brutal, right? But the inability to even potentially hurt them is just really gross. He lost a bunch of guys, and I attacked at one time. The Morgul went at the Maw Crusher and did 10 wounds, I think, on it. And so he started to pivot away from Manfred and really focus that spell on the Morgul and Neferata. But it was really too late. And he didn't... he did a couple wounds. He did get one Morgul down almost halfway, but of course then it heals up when it kills things. And he spent the first couple turns just trying to make things work in close combat with those units, and then trying to hit me from afar with the shaman. By about the 3rd turn, he realized, boy, that's not going to work. And so he started moving up his 3 units of Ardboys. And by that point, the Maw Crusher and Gore-Gruntas had all been killed, and I could repivot the Morgul and Neferata back across onto the other side of that middle piece of terrain and engage the Ardboys. And I think at that point, because I had the Wraith with the Cursed Book in there as well, I had to split the Morgul because one of them had to remain to stay in combat against the Maw Crusher, and that eventually finished them off. But basically I had Neferata, one Morgul, and the Cursed Book on the other side, which still made it a -3, unfortunately, for their units. And our boys only hit on 4s, so they were unable to hit at all. So they just basically charged into combat and then got slaughtered and could not fight back. There were a couple attacks on skeletons that needed like 6s to hit, and I think they killed like a couple skeletons, but they just kind of during my hero phase, they came back, and the skeletons were even killing a couple Ardboys themselves. So this was a demoralizing situation for him, and I think he just, in my opinion, like I said, you need to play for the scenario. And I think he just kind of gave up on it, and he hopped off his vortex. I'm not really sure why. I was trying to hit him with my spells, because that's the only way I could hit him and do some wounds on the shaman while he's up there. But he has a mortal wound save, and I don't really quite know the reason why, but he decided to get off that and run away. And I managed to catch up with him with my Morgul at the other end of the board, and had him killed. But I really think this was a scenario, like I said, he said afterwards he didn't know what the army could do, and so that's completely understandable from that perspective. But I do think that there could have been an opportunity for him to win. And here's how I would have, in hindsight, maybe said how it should work. First off, I wiped out his entire army, so he gave me full points. I don't quite think that's how it should work. To win a major victory, you need to secure the objective with 5 or more models. I didn't have that many models on the other side of the board. The problem with this army is that it's literally 2 Morgul and those 2 bigger models, and that's all you have. Those are the only things doing anything on the table. They're the only thing with movement, and if you can control those 4 elements, you'll win. I can get to the other side of the board with those 4 units. I can't necessarily get over there with my units of skeletons that easily. And frankly, I didn't move them up for the first couple turns, so I think I kind of made an error there myself. I should have been moving them up right from the very get-go. I kind of forgot about them, to be honest, because like I said, they're really just not part of the overarching strategy, and I was more focused on like, oh my god, these Morgul are going to get in, it's going to be great. And so the skeletons were just kind of at the back of my mind, like, meh, whatever. But I really needed those to actually get the major. Now, it doesn't actually say, to my knowledge, in the General's Handbook, that if you wipe your opponent out, you get the major automatically. You need to, in my opinion, control that objective. If you don't, then it goes to whoever killed the most points, in which case I would win the minor by default. But I honestly think it should have been a minor victory for me. But he was kind of like, all right, I'm just going to give you everything. And there were 3 bonus points for killing the most characters, for killing the character with the most wounds, and for killing the warlord. And so I ended up 8-0. Now, like I said, I think there were ways tactically to change this. And one of the things to do is to wait me out. All right. You know that you could secure a minor by keeping more points alive. And you know that I would need, in order to get the major, I'd need to move across the board with more models than the 2 Morgul and the 2 Mortarks. And if I don't do that, I can't win. And, had he understood that, I think, a little bit better, you could have charged in, or rather, not charged in with the Maw Crusher and Gore Grunters. I know it's kind of, that's what orcs do. But, for instance, if he had, rather than tried to just keep on in combat, but instead had opted to move out of combat and away from my Morgul, I would have been in a position where I would have to either move my army off to engage those, and the army works off that minus to hit. So, and it's such a concentrated bubble. So if that gets too spread out, it's just not going to be quite as effective. Likewise, had I think he pushed with the Ardboys down the other side even at the same time, such that I could only engage with the Mongol on one flank, and he would at least have an opportunity to hit back on one Mongol. I think he could have had a much better chance at trying to get models within range of the objective on my half of the table. And I think that likewise, he could have just avoided me the entire game until the turn that really matters, where if you get 5 models within the range at the end of the round, you win. And just avoided me, because I don't have any ranged attacks. And moved basically half the army on one side, half the other, and just wait me out. And, that was, I think, a possibility maybe in hindsight to control this type of army, because then you're going to force my hand. And, worst case scenario, like I said, it's going to be very difficult for me to win the major. And you force at least a minor. But didn't happen, and I got 8-0. Okay, and the second game, this was against Khorne Bloodbound, which, again, was a really great army matchup for my particular army. Once he's putting down all the stuff over there, on the other side of the field, rather intimidating with all the Blood Reavers and Blood Warriors and Wrathmongers. And Wrathmongers are always the type of thing that you really want to watch out for, especially if you're so concentrated on just a few models like my army is. But I know from experience at Holy Havoc that Mongol can't... It's very difficult for Mongol to even hurt a Mongol. So even if the Wrathmonger makes a Mongol kind of go berserk and attack itself, generally speaking, it's not going to be that bad unless you absolutely roll terrible for your armor save, because you're still immune to rend and so on and so forth, and you can still heal up in combat phases. And so I knew kind of, okay, I'm going to put those 2 Mongol together and just kind of move them up the field and kind of keep everything else away from them, so that they'll get in there, and if the Wrathmongers are a problem, then, it'd be 1 Mongol on Mongol or whatnot. And we were playing 3 places of power. He got the first round, which was very key in my opinion. The one in the middle is kind of underneath the archway in that building. And then the 2 on the other side have this big wall in front of them. And we played it as though those walls were not quite impassable, but you would have to move up and then move across and then move down, and so they'd be pretty difficult to move over unless you have flying. And so that basically meant that the objective on either side, one behind each of the walls, were really easy for us to control by each of our armies, and then the middle one was really the one that was most contested, in my opinion. So the first turn, he was able to capture the middle one and move up fairly close to the third one behind the wall. And so that was kind of key. So you get that point, and you start accumulating points depending on at the end of the round, and you get more points the longer that you've hold one of those objectives for the longest. And so I moved up Manfred, and because I can move really far, I grabbed the one behind the wall on my side. And so that gives us, each have 1, but he's going to grab the 3rd point on the last one. And this was actually a pretty good game. It came down more to strategy because, even though those 2 Mongol, again, were a real pain, and he was kind of surprised that his Reavers that are in close combat basically couldn't hit the Mongol again because their bravery is low. So even though he had a bunch of modifiers to hit, I still had more than enough that were actually minus, because their bravery is low. So each of the Mongol, the minus hit is actually a 2. So 2 Mongol, you're at -4, and then Neferata is a -5 to hit. So that basically anything on that side of the table was absolutely screwed. Um, and I didn't, I when it came to the time when the Wrathmongers died and the Mongol did attack, I kind of let him attack as though there were no modifiers because I didn't quite know how that would work. It's technically an enemy unit, but because it's attacking itself, I'm not really sure if that would qualify or whatnot. In either case, if this is more of a tactical game. The second turn, he grabbed the third objective behind the wall on his side. And I'm not really sure if there was a way here that he could have pulled it off. Eventually, I killed his character that was capturing the one in the middle. And then, so I got the one. And Manfred, who was controlling the other, there was some combat involving the skeletons, and a Wrathmonger died there, and the blood went over to Manfred, and Manfred basically did like 8 wounds on himself, and then he managed to kill him off with a spell, I think, or something like that. And so Manfred died, and I lost that objective. You need characters to hold these, so and my Wraith was in the middle as well, so there's really no way in which I could move over or control that third one very well. So it came down to a tie. We actually got the exact same amount of points because he captured that third one, but it wasn't making as many points as the original ones that I captured. And because I pushed them off the middle, we were then, by the end of the game, we're kind of equal. So I think in this case, the Mongol definitely protected me from taking a lot of damage. But they were not quite as decisive for winning the game according to the objectives. As I said, I think that's one of the weaknesses of this type of army. So that was actually a pretty fun and competitive game. So before I get to the third game, let me just kind of, I guess, point out that during the second game, we tied in terms of the objective. So then it goes to victory points. And I lost 1 unit of skeletons in Manfred. And he had lost a few units as well. And so we calculated up. And I just won by a very small margin. I had lost not as many points as he did. So I won the minor. And there were a couple of modifiers as well. I think he got 3 points and I got 6. The most you can get in a game is 8. So my first game was 8, the second game 6, so I was actually doing really good. So the third game, I was on atop a table, and I was playing against a guy that was playing a combined Chaos Army. And this is Blood and Glory, where there's 4 objectives across the board, and you need to have the most amount of models by those to capture them. And this was going to be tough. Like I said, I don't have a lot of models, and it was really brutal. It became kind of a bitter game from my perspective. I guess I kind of knew I was going to lose the game before it even really started. But I'm also very conscious that maybe my previous opponents may have thought the same thing. So I was really trying to find ways in which I could gain at least the bonus points, or maybe make it a minor victory or something like that. And there's just absolutely no way. He had this is a guy that we had a conversation afterwards, and he could not care less about the hobby or models or collecting or anything like that. He's just purely into the game, purely wants to crush opponents. And so he bought a list that he it was on like a website or something, and he just basically made that. Sounds like he just made it like I don't know, a week before the tournament or something, because his models were completely unpainted. Completely, most of the armies there at least were partially painted. In the works, working towards a complete army. This guy's army was completely gray plastic. So it is what it is. And he had 9 Skyfires in one unit and 6 in another, and a big unit of bloodletters and a couple units of marauders, and hail the Hafeless with some of those big ranged Had Ogres as well. I totally forget the name of them. So, I knew with that range potency, I've never actually played against Skyfires, but I know they're brutal, and they absolutely were. I was planning to maybe try to get the objective. I was planning on kind of keeping it low, hiding for a bit, and then maybe jumping out and trying to grab something, or at least do something. And we should have had a conversation before the game started about the role of the terrain. We had that conversation in the previous game, and because we're on, or at least I was on the same table, I kind of assumed that the same rules applied. So I moved Manfred and Neferata behind the wall, thinking, well, he's not going to be able to see me. And likewise, that, again, if you wanted to move over it, unless you fly, you'd have to move up, over, and then down. And both of those understanding of the terrain, both of those rules or whatnot, he just didn't really recognize. And so I was thinking, okay, well, at least they're kind of safe from fire, and the sky fighters will need to move around the wall to shoot them or get some angle that I'm not seeing or something. And I know the sky fighters can move around pretty far and such. But, according to him, both of those Mortarks were just out in the open, and he could clearly, even though they're behind a wall, in my opinion, could easily see them. So, so he just basically killed Manfred right off the bat. And actually, Neferata was out first. So Neferata was on the flank. And so he killed her right off the bat. And then basically, I think he did a bunch of wounds even to Manfred. And then when it came to, most of our turns were fairly, the standard kind of turn movement. But I went first because I deployed first. And then he went, and then he got the double turn. And so then he killed Manfred. And he moved right over the wall with all his bloodletters, and went into my unit of skeletons. And basically at that point I was like, there's no possible way, right? Like, there's no way I can control 3 of these objectives with more models than he has, right? Having lost like some of my most potent models, but also the ones that can move the farthest and actually do something. The skeletons aren't going to do anything. And so I just had the couple Mongol left, really. And, to be honest, I'm not concerned about the amount of marauders or even the big horde of bloodletters. I mean, those were not, for all intents and purposes, I really couldn't care if those were in the army at all. It's purely those skyfires. And like I said, if this army encountered a ranged army, it would be in trouble. It does amazing against a melee army like Iron Jaws or the a Khorne, a Bloodbound that I went up against my first 2 games. But I also knew, as I said at the beginning, that if they fight against a ranged army, they're going to be in trouble. And that's exactly what happened. Because Manfred and Neferata, 11 wounds behemoths with a 4+ armor save, that's not very resilient whatsoever. And I did not get off my spells that could maybe make one of them immune to rend and give them a +1 or something on their armor save. So that basically made them both absolutely screwed. Mongol are pretty good against range, but they're not quite as fast and their bubble's not as big. They're still fairly fast, but because they're off on one side, off on their own, he started to kind of shoot on those and eventually kind of whittled one down, got rid of one. One of those Mongol managed to make it up to one of his characters and kill one of those, but basically it died shortly thereafter. And that was really kind of the end of the game. And that, like I said, this guy was just focused purely on winning. He kind of knew he was going to win. There were times when he was a pushing around a pile of his models, and I don't really appreciate that in an organized event at all. But I'm not one to really make a big deal of it at the time, but I was kind of a little annoyed about that, especially since he's kicking my butt at the same time. But in the end, I mean, he basically, I think he tabled me, or actually I conceded once the second Mongol was done, because it's like, I got 2 units of skeletons at the back, and it's like round 3, and he's going to kill those off with the Skyfires, absolutely no problem. So I didn't actually get any of these secondaries that time, and so I lost 8-0 in that one. And at the end of the game, he had kind of said, well, that he was afraid that I would put them all in one bubble, right in the center, and I kind of had them spread out, Mongol on one side, Neferata and Manfred kind of in the other. I don't think that would have been a way to achieving victory in this scenario, because number one, you still need to capture all the objectives on the other side they're all over the table. There's one in each of the corners of the table. But also, like I said, I'm not afraid of his melee units. If it was a melee army, I probably would have crushed it. But because it's a ranged army and he can stay outside my minus bubble, it's really not having them all together. I don't think would have achieved me anything other than I don't even think the game would have lasted any longer. He would have killed Manfred Neferata as easily as he did, and the Mongol just as easily. So I don't think that would have changed the thing. But in any case, that was kind of a disappointing game. Kind of a bad vibe, in my opinion, in terms of overall. But like I said, I was kind of conscious of the fact that a melee army might think the same thing of me. So, it is what it is. All right, so the final review. I think because you do well in the first 2 games, it's like you have hopes, and you're at the top table. And so it's like, oh yeah, I got this. I'm going to win this tournament. And I almost never go into a tournament, really believing I'm going to win. I always think, wouldn't it be awesome if I do? But, I know from experience not to really expect that. But doing so well in those first 2 games, I was thinking, I got a good chance at this. And then I was like, uh-oh, look at all those Skyfires. So losing the 3rd game so horribly was kind of a rather big disappointment. So the final scores, the guy that stomped me 8-0, like I said, the guy was just purely focused on winning, and he basically did very well against his previous 2 opponents as well. So he got the award for Best General. James from the Rolling Bad podcast came overall, and Jules got Best Painted. Now, I'm trying to think how it went here. I think I was actually tied with Jules overall, but his paint score was slightly higher. So technically speaking, in terms of points, I was 3rd. And because painting was actually a lot more points than I was expecting. I think I got 14 points for painting. James and Jules, they got the same score at 17 points. And keep in mind, you can only get a total of 24 for winning all 3 games 8-0, or winning 8 points in all 3 games, rather. So that's a pretty substantial boost. And because the 3 of us were the only ones with fully painted armies, basically like the people that came 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th were like way behind. So I didn't end up walking away from any prizes or rewards, unfortunately. But it was kind of funny because I was technically third overall, and there's this huge gap in points between everyone behind me. So I was kind of a little bit annoyed, but it is what it is. Like I said, I don't go in expecting, so that's all good. Overall, I think it was kind of a fun little event. I certainly don't regret driving down. I have mixed feelings about the army and the way that people seem to really think it made a death overpowered in some respects. There were actually 2 other tables with Mongol. So there's actually a high percentage of Mongols at that tournament. But I was the only one that was using 2, and the only one using Heferata as my general to get more minuses to hit and such. So I was the only one maxing it out. So there were a few other death armies. Basically, the 2 armies that I showed at the beginning of the video, one was James, the other was Jules. Jules had a crazy army of tons of snakes and a Mongol. I'm kind of thankful I didn't fight that one. That was a kind of a brutal army, I think, for a lot of people. And so I think, one of the deaf players was pretty happy about the fact that I had brought this, because I think he said that he had thought about designing this type of army, so to actually see it in action was kind of cool. Like I said, the first 2 games were pretty, in terms of completing the objectives of this scenario, a little bit of a challenge. But in terms of just, if you're not concerned with that, if you're just playing a game where you're just working to get the most amount of victory points or something like that, and you have a melee opponent, oh man, they're going to be in trouble. Like, it's really difficult to if they don't have any type of ranged or any, even then, Mongol are just ridiculous. But if you have to fight Mongol, like if there's no other way to get those points other than killing them in hand to hand, oh, it's impossible. With all those minuses to hit. To be honest, prior to this tournament, I was kind of really excited. Since I made that video earlier this month, there's actually another tournament popping up in Denver at the end of July. So there are like 3 tournaments around here in the next couple months, which is pretty crazy. But as I said, things in my personal life have kind of taken a turn. We were supposed to move down to Colorado Springs temporarily until I can find some sort of gainful employment, and who knows where that will be. Could be anywhere in the United States. But I think now we're going to be going up to North Dakota. So it's a bit of a ways. But I'll tell you what, I'm kind of excited about doing tournaments. And I was thinking, I don't need models. I should probably be putting most of my spending money into a gas and staying at hotels. And while I'm unemployed, I could, or even if I am employed, I could travel around the United States, going to a few of these tournaments. So it's about, where we're going, North Dakota, it's about 10 hours north of where I am. If I wanted to go down to Rolling Bad Rumble in Albuquerque, it's about 8 hours from here, so about 18 hours total. I'm still thinking maybe doing it. And like I said, I might still come down for some of these other tournaments or some of the other GTs across the country even. I think it'd be fun to start doing that maybe a little bit more regularly. However, I do think I do want to go to, I probably wouldn't go to an event like this, and it wasn't because it wasn't fun or reasonably organized. It's just mostly it's got to be worth the effort in terms of turnout. And in the end, because of the separation of points, I kind of feel like I should be going to tournaments that have like a painting score and so on and so forth. Ones that do require some painting. So I think I should probably think about going to the bigger GTs. Still think I might do Rolling Bad Rumble, as I said. I think they have space up to 32 people, but there are other events going on, across the United States, and I definitely want to try to go to Adepticon and such next year. But I want to paint up something new. I probably don't want to bring this list at all. It does make me think, if you fight against people that are very focused on just bringing the most powerful list possible, most of my lists are fairly fluffy. Probably won't do so well against those. So that's kind of another reason to go where there's some painting score that might help me out overall. So I didn't win any prizes at this particular tournament. I did, however, pick up a box of Tomb King snakes. So I was actually the first one at this tournament. And I walked in right when the doors opened, and I was kind of hanging around for the first hour, not doing anything. And so you always kind of look around, and you never know what you find at these places. There's actually a lot of Warhammer kits that are probably not available at other stores, right? And it's because they only came out for a certain time, and then they were no longer supported or whatnot. So there are a number of books and kits that I thought, well, boy, man, if I could buy those and put those on eBay, I'd probably do fairly well. And this was definitely one of them. I saw these right there, and I was like, oh man. So I grabbed it, and I know these snakes are really good and close in Tomb Kings, and currently with their point values, even with the boosted point values of the General's Handbook 2, they're probably still half decent, and they're one of the more brutal Tomb King units you can kind of encounter. I know that. I didn't really get them for that reason. I bought them mostly because I only had the one unit. I mean, that's not going to do too much. But I bought them mostly because they're a print model, something that's hard to get, something that is probably still worth quite a bit on eBay. And as a collector, I like to pick up old models. So that's the review of the tournament. Overall, pretty good. I had a lot of fun. I wish the last game wasn't quite as bitter, but there it is. I mean, it comes down to having that conversation, I think, mostly about the terrain, because even if I knew I was going to lose, I still, had I been able to hide Neferata and Manfred behind the wall, as I thought, I still would have, made a game of it. I probably would have lost, but I would have at least done something, as opposed to kill one model and then have my army tabled. So, in any case, have a good one. Bye.